Welcome, my name is Jeremy and I'll be presenting our paper Learning from Natural Language Feedback, on which I collaborated with John, June, Angelica, Kyun-Hyun and Ethan. Language models achieve strong performance across diverse natural language processing tasks, from summarization to question answering and conversational agents. A key problem, however, with language models is that they can generate text that violates human preferences. Examples of this are generating misinformation, where a language model repeats misinformation it learned from a data set. Generating offensive language, where a language model produces toxic language that it picked up from its training data set. Or generating factually incorrect outputs. In the case of text summarization, this could, for example, be a summary that poorly reflects the content of the text and makes factually incorrect statements. Current methods alleviate such issues by training language models to generate text that scores highly according to human preferences, or a predictive model thereof. Let's illustrate this on the task of text summarization. We assume we have a given text, from which a language model generates two summaries. Human evaluators then indicate their preferences by comparing the summaries. A model can then learn the preferences from humans by looking at those comparisons. The problem with these approaches, however, is that each comparison provides little information about human preferences per evaluation. For this reason, we propose to use natural language feedback, which contains more information about human preferences per evaluation. In particular, we introduce a three-step learning algorithm. We will illustrate our algorithm on the task of text summarization, concretely on summarizing Reddit posts, since this is the task that we conduct our experiments on. As a setup, we use a language model to generate an output. A human then writes feedback on that output. For summarization, this means that we condition the language model on a Reddit post and instruct it to write a summary, on which a human then writes feedback. Now, we don't make any restrictions on the feedback in any way. That is, the feedback can mention negative as well as positive things about a summary. It can also mention how an ideal summary should look like or how the current summary could be improved. In the first step of our algorithm, we condition the language model on the input, output, and feedback in order to generate multiple refinements. We instruct the model to use the feedback on the summary in order to write a better summary that incorporates the points mentioned in the feedback. Since we now have multiple refinements, we need a method to choose which one we eventually take. Optimally, we want to choose the one that incorporates most of the points mentioned in the feedback. This is what we do in step 2 of our algorithm. Concretely, we choose the refinement with the highest similarity with the feedback. There are various options on how one could calculate similarity. In our work, we use contrastive pre-trained embeddings offered by the OpenAI API to calculate the embedding of the feedback and the refinement. We then calculate the cosine similarity between each feedback refinement pair and select the one with the highest similarity. As a third and last step, we fine-tune the same language model on those improved outputs. This implies that we fine-tune a language model to write summaries that are more aligned with human preferences, since we fine-tune on summaries that incorporate feedback written by humans. In the first experiment, we want to investigate whether language models can actually use natural language feedback. To this end, we conduct a synthetic experiment. Concretely, we assume that we are given a sentence with up to 10 offensive words. The task is to remove up to 3 offensive words. Here is an example prompt of how this could look like. In this text, many toxic and offensive words are used. You're such a jerk and a nice person and an idiot. The ideal text should remove the word jerk, but otherwise be unchanged. Now, why is this an important experiment? Well, for our algorithm to work, we want language models to be able to understand very specific and nuanced natural language feedback, which can mention positive or negative things about a certain part of a model output. This experiment can tell us whether language models can actually do this or not. Now note that we use GPT-3 and InstructGPT to generate a completion given a prompt. Note that we use greedy decoding and we only generate one completion per prompt. So in this experiment, we don't generate multiple completions and select one, but we only generate one completion. Now, let's have a look at the plot. On the x-axis, we have various model sizes. On the y-axis, we represent the accuracy, where the accuracy is calculated as the exact string matching of the model completion and the target sentence, where the target sentence is automatically generated, since this is a synthetic task. Now from this plot we can observe two important takeaways. First, language models are actually able to leverage natural language feedback. And second, only large models can do so a non-negligible amount of times. Given that, in the next experiments we will only use the largest model sizes. Let's now look at our main experiment. We choose to evaluate our algorithm on the task of text summarization. Concretely, we summarize Reddit posts. As mentioned before, we use a language model to generate summaries, then write feedback on those summaries and condition the language model on the input, summary, and feedback in order to generate multiple refinements. In our experiments, we generate 20 refinements per sample. We then select the refinement with the highest cosine similarity between the feedback and refinement embedding. With this process, we generate a trained dataset with 100 samples on which we fine-tune the language model. We then evaluate the fine-tuned model on 100 test samples. The language model we use to generate refinements is InstructGPT Da Vinci, which is a fine-tuned version of GPT-3 that is better at following instructions. Unfortunately, InstructGPT cannot be fine-tuned via OpenAI's API, which is why we fine-tune GPT-3 Da Vinci on the dataset with 100 refined summaries. Our algorithm is called GPT-3 fine-tuned on refine with feedback plus best of n, where best of n refers to selecting the best refinement out of 20. That is the one with the highest similarity to the feedback. We compare our method to the following baselines. GPT-3 fine-tuned on the initial summaries, that is the summaries we wrote feedback on. Also, we compare to InstructGPT and GPT-3 that are prompted in a zero-shot manner. That is just by prompting the model to generate a summary given a post. Lastly, we compare all methods to human reference summaries, which are summaries that are written along the Reddit posts by the corresponding authors. We evaluate the quality of the generated summaries in a human evaluation. We do this by presenting a post and various summaries to humans, without them knowing which summary was produced by what method, and then we ask them to rank all the summaries. Now let's look at the results. On the y-axis, we can see the various methods, where ours is shown in red. On the y-axis, we calculate the win rate of various methods against human summaries. The win rate is calculated by comparing the rank of a specific method with the rank of the human summary. And remember, those ranks were given by humans. We count a better rank as a win and a tie as half a win. In blue and green, we can observe that zero-shot prompting GPT-3 and InstructGPT does not produce high-quality results, that is, summaries. In orange, we can see the results of fine-tuning GPT-3 on initial summaries that were also generated in a zero-shot manner. We can clearly see that there is some sort of task adaptation happening, since the quality of the summaries generated by a fine-tuned GPT-3 increases and actually comes close to human performance. Lastly, in red, we observe the results of our method, that is fine-tuning GPT-3 on refined summaries that leveraged feedback. Our method outperforms all baselines and achieves roughly human-level summarization performance by training on only 100 samples. As a next step, we want to further investigate how the refinements we generate in the first step of our algorithm compare to initial summaries. So here we look at our algorithm without fine-tuning. That is, we refine summaries with feedback and select the best out of 20 refinements by using our scoring method. The first baseline is the exact same algorithm, but instead of using our scoring function, we randomly select a refinement out of 20 refinements. This comparison helps us to identify how much of our performance gains are due to the scoring function. The second baseline we compare against is to generate 20 refinements without sample-specific feedback and randomly selecting one of those. For this baseline, we just instruct the language model to improve upon a given summary for a specific Reddit posts. That is, we don't provide any specific feedback, but just tell it to generally improve. This comparison helps us to identify how much of our performance gains are due to the language model being able to leverage task-specific feedback by humans. Let's look at the results. On the x-axis, we again have various methods. On the y-axis, we now calculate the win rate of those methods against initial summaries. So the summaries that we wrote feedback on. In blue, we can see that the quality of the human summaries is quite high. Then in green, refining without feedback does not improve on initial summaries. When we look at the orange bar, which is the refinement with feedback and then randomly selecting a refinement, we can see that the summary quality already improves to near human level performance. The orange and green bar combined imply that using a task-specific human feedback is very useful and improves summarization quality. Lastly, we have our method depicted in red. When we compare the red to the orange bar, that is, using a scoring function versus randomly selecting a refinement, we can observe that introducing the scoring function gives us another performance boost, and we get to roughly human-level summarization quality. Now, given that our refinements improve on the summaries, we want to investigate whether this phenomenon actually happens because the refinements incorporate feedback. We again compare our method in red versus randomly selecting a refinement in orange and refining without feedback in green. In a human evaluation, we provide evaluators with a post, initial summary, feedback, and refinement, and then ask whether at least one point mentioned in the feedback is incorporated into the refinement. We also ask whether more than one point of the feedback is incorporated or whether all of the feedback is incorporated. This is depicted on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we show the percentage of summaries that fulfill the criteria of the x-axis. Note that the green bar, that is the refinement without feedback, did not have access to the provided feedback. So it is expected that this method does not incorporate things that the feedback mentions, and it is used as a counterfactual baseline. We observe that our method in red indeed incorporates at least one point mentioned in the feedback 72% of the time. As expected, it is also harder to include more than one or even all points mentioned in the feedback. Comparing the yellow baseline, where we select the refinements randomly, we can again observe that the scoring function that we introduce allows us to incorporate feedback with high accuracy. As expected, the green baseline performs poorly. Now, in our work, we show that learning from natural language feedback is an effective way to align language models with human preferences. In the future, we would like to do larger scale evaluations with larger data sets and where we conduct more analysis on how and why exactly the refinements improve on initial summaries. Most importantly, we also want to compare the sample efficiency of our method to using binary feedback. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation about our paper, Learning from Natural Language Feedback. If you have any questions, feel free to drop by my poster or reach out with mail. Thanks a lot.